Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Applied Forensic Psych podcast. I'm your host, Leah Hicknell. I'm going to be conducting most of the interviews for this podcast for the next while. I haven't yet decided on a name for it. Maybe by the time I have it posted, I'll have thought of one, but if not, please send me ideas. Before we get started, I want to give a little bit of a content advisory warning. We will be talking about domestic violence during this episode, so if that is a hard topic for you, I would advise you to click off of this episode and join us for the next one. My guest here today is a survivor of domestic violence. We have decided to keep her name private for safety reasons. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
All right, so my first question for you is, how long were you involved in this relationship?
This relationship started at the end of my grade 11 year. I would say the spring of 2021. I was 16 years old when it began, and I was just about to turn 18 at the end of it.
And would you say that the abusive behavior started immediately, or was there a typical honeymoon phase that most relationships follow?
There was definitely a honeymoon phase. The abuse started slow. Some things that are abusive, I was manipulated into thinking otherwise. I didn't start getting physically hit until about 4 months into the relationship. And at that point, I was convinced into thinking that the abuse was a reaction to my horrible personality.
Yeah. For an abusive relationship, it typically follows a cycle of 1, tension builds, 2, an incident occurs, 3, reconciliation happens, and then finally 4, it's calm for a bit. Would you say that your relationship followed this typical pattern?
I would say on a day-to-day, I experienced 1, 2, 3, and 4. During reconciliation, I was told if I stopped acting certain ways and isolated myself and stopped talking to certain people, then the abuse wouldn't happen anymore. Because he loved me and he didn't mean to act that way, but he couldn't help it.
And when we talk about domestic violence, especially violence against women in particular, a big issue is often victim blaming and the question of why didn't you leave? I'm curious to know how you would describe the complexities of leaving such a difficult situation.
I would say manipulation has to be one of the biggest things you have to deal with when you're in an abusive relationship. I was manipulated into thinking that it was my fault that he was doing this to me and that I was such a horrible person. I didn't think about leaving because I thought this was love, and I thought if I changed myself and did everything he wanted me to, then this behavior would stop and get better, back to how he treated me in the beginning of the relationship. There was never a thought like, how do I get out of this? Because I didn't see the problem. I felt like his actions were justified because of the way it was explained to me that I was the reason that I was causing this to happen.
Why did you keep saying you think you were a horrible person? Why do you think that you were a horrible person?
I feel like it was drilled into my brain that I was a horrible person. I don't think there was an actual reason for me to think that. But every day I was told I was a horrible person.
It was just the way it was told to you.
Yeah.
And because of the abuse and the violence, was there ever any legal intervention during this relationship, and how did that end up playing out?
So a couple times throughout the relationship, the police were called for a domestic altercation. So there were times I'd have to answer the door to the police being there. And me and him, he would also be with me. We'd kind of explain that we got into a fight, but it was resolved and that they didn't need to be there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually there was one time where my neighbors intervened during an altercation and called the police on my boyfriend. At that point, he got arrested and we weren't legally allowed to speak to each other or have each other on any social media. I was told while he was getting arrested that it didn't matter if I gave a statement or not because there were 2 witnesses claiming he punched me in the face. And regardless if I denied whether he did that or not, he would still be charged. I didn't end up giving a statement because I was still in love with him and I was worried about him going to jail and it being my fault that he was in jail. So there was no charge actually given to my knowledge because the police told me he was going to get arrested and charged no matter what I said. And I didn't end up saying anything.
And at that time, you thought that him being charged would be not beneficial at all.
I thought it would make it worse.
Yeah, exactly.
But looking back now, I would not do the same thing I did then.
You would have given a statement.
I would have given a statement, and I would have made sure he couldn't do this to anyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of other areas of your life, so your family, your friendships, and your schooling, how did that relationship impact other areas?
I would think if I wasn't in this relationship, the friends I had during high school, like my friend group at the time, I probably would have stayed being friends with them because at the time I pushed them away because my boyfriend told me they were bad friends. My family and I also had a lot of problems at this point in my life. We were not getting along. I was not going to school, and I was never at home either. It was just me and him isolated in his bedroom for almost 2 years. And then we were dating throughout the senior year of high school, so I had a panic attack disorder, and I was unable to actually attend my classes or go to school like a normal person. I ended up graduating, but at that point, my mental health was so terrible that I could not go to university when I graduated. I had to stay home and work on my mental health.
So you ended up taking a year off.
I took a year off, and then I went to university when I felt like I could.
And do you think he was saying your relationships and your family and your friends were bad people because they were calling him out on his behavior, or because they were also able to have an opinion on you or control you?
They could definitely give opinions to make me change of how I'd respond to his behavior, because they'd say, why are you apologizing? Why are you doing this? You didn't do anything wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And he did not like that. There were multiple times where I had to block everybody. I couldn't even have conversations with my parents. When me and my parents would fight, he would make me leave the house.
Okay, so he kind of wanted it to just be you and him and no outside opinion whatsoever.
Yeah.
Isolating you.
Yeah, for sure.
Wow. Okay. And would you say that this still affects you today, and in what way?
I definitely still have nightmares of real life situations or arguments that me and him had in the past. My anxiety also works in abnormal ways now because the fears I do have and the things I think about definitely aren't normal ways of thinking, and I definitely think they stem from being abused.
Yeah. And what piece of advice would you give to anyone in a similar situation?
To anyone dealing with domestic violence, whether it's physical abuse or not, I would definitely recommend speaking to somebody, whether it's a friend, a parent, a therapist, even a teacher, a prof. Anybody except you is going to be able to look at your situation, hear what's going on, and tell you the truth. Without manipulation, without shame, and most importantly, without poisoned thoughts or feelings of being scared. I remember I was scared all the time to even tell people what was going on because I felt ashamed. I'd say there's definitely, look forward to after, because there's definitely an after. I was always scared that what would happen to me if he was no longer in my life. But since then, I've realized there's so much more to life than depending on somebody who doesn't actually love you in the way that love is supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you so much for being here today.
Of course.
And
I'm glad I could talk
so
about this. Yeah.
That's awesome.
No, I think it's a super important topic that needs to be discussed more.
Thank you so much. If you or anyone you know is struggling with domestic violence, the St. FX website has many helpful resources under their page listed as supports and resources. Thank you so much for listening today, and thank you again for being here.
Thank you.
All right, bye guys.
See ya.